Josh Giddey was just listed as one of the 5 breakout potential candidates for the NBA in the 2024-25 season. We're going to discuss that a little bit. Plus, we're going to look at why the Chicago Bulls need to learn from the Lauri Markkanen situation, but why they can't let it cripple them too much. All that, plus the Warriors no longer being interested in Zach LaVine, which they never really were, and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And so I want to start off with Bleacher Report recently came out with a list of 5 potential young breakout candidates in the NBA last season, and Josh Giddey was listed among that list. Now, Josh Giddey has things that definitely I think he's going to benefit from hugely in this. And I want to talk about, how Josh Giddey could break out in a way, right? And so I talked about before, when I talked about a couple of episodes ago, the potential of Josh Giddey getting into the most improved player of the year candidate. And I talked about how him having the ball back in his hands and getting back closer to what he was, those stats were in 2022-23. And a couple of guys mentioned how, well, if he just gets back to that, it's going to really put him in the candidacy of being a most improved player of the year. And I would say yes and no, because it's how you also get those stats. Josh Giddey has had, for example, 11 triple-doubles over his NBA career. When you look at how the Chicago Bulls team is made up and how he's going to have the ball in his hands to be able to really thrive and do the things, there's a huge possibility that Josh Giddey more than doubles just the number of triple-doubles he's had in his career just next season. Now, that's a huge, accomplishment if he's able to do that. But the more important thing to me than the numbers, right? We know Josh Giddey can go out and get numbers. If you put the ball in his hands, he operates as a point guard. There's no doubt. Josh Giddey can go out there and perform for you, and he's going to put up some really good numbers for your squad. The bigger question than can he put up numbers is that can the Bulls win while he's putting up those numbers, and how do the Bulls look? Now, it's not all on Josh Giddey. I'm not saying that it comes down to if we win or lose, it's just on Josh Giddey's ability to play make or whatever else. No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that at being 21 years old, having the ball in your hands, having, again, an additional ball handler and Kobe White out there for when the time where the defense packs it in on you, there's more than enough reason to believe that Josh Giddey can be one of the breakout candidates. But how do you measure what a breakout is, right? And so that's the kind of the question that you have to ask yourself for Josh Giddey is what quantifies as a breakout season for a player that's already had a season where he's averaged almost 17, 8, and 6, right? So that's another question you have to ask yourself when it comes down to Josh Giddey. Josh Giddey has had seasons where he's been an extremely productive player stat-wise. 16 and a half points per game, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, and then almost a steal and a half a block per game, shooting the ball 48% from 3. But to me, what truly can make Josh Giddey somebody who breaks out in 2024-25 isn't just if he can get back to averaging almost, those numbers, right? It's how more efficient can you be in getting those numbers. That's the question with Josh Giddey, is the efficiency with it and when it comes down to it. So that's a question that you have to ask yourself, man. Josh Giddey with the OKC Thunder in 2023-24, he possessed the ball for only 2.8 minutes per game. And he was third on the OKC Thunder. Let's just keep that in mind. A player that is better with the ball in their hands, the only average having the ball for 2.8 minutes per game, you already understand why Josh Giddey was not nearly as productive. People try to talk about Josh Giddey, and I think they look at just the raw stat number and say that he must have fell off. It was his role extremely changed for that OKC Thunder. He's going to have the ball in his hands probably almost 10 times that amount per game. If Josh Giddey only possessed the ball for 2.8 minutes last season for the OKC Thunder, and what he's going to be able to do as the point guard, the playmaker, getting rebounds, getting out on fast breaks, do not be surprised if that is number. And it was indicated by his numbers. He averaged career lows in points, rebounds, and assists, and still did 12, 6, and almost 5 in that time. Somebody who averaged 5 assists with only possessing the ball 2.8 minutes per game. Like, I get the doubt around the player type that Josh Giddey is, right? But it's somebody who he really has an ability, a special ability to play make. And so it comes down to, can you refine your game? We know you can pass. We know you can rebound. Your size, the court vision that you have, the playmaking, we know you can do that. But how more efficient can you be? And that's what I'm looking at in Josh Giddey in the 2024-25 season, is can he be a more efficient and smarter player? People have also pointed out Josh Giddey's turnovers. While in his career, he's averaged 5.7 assists per game, he's also averaged about half that in assists, half that in turnovers, 2.6 turnovers per game. So Josh Giddey needs to refine even his decision-making. While he is a really good playmaker, we've already talked about how he's in the 90th percentile of open shots generated for teammates. He's in the 86th percentile of assists over his NBA career. Get those turnovers down. I would love for Josh Giddey to become one of those players. Now, he's going to handle the ball a lot. But if he can get that turnover number down to 1.5 turnovers per game while maintaining his ability to get you 6 to 7 assists per game, I think that that's a perfect indication of Josh Giddey refining his game a little bit. And that's really what you want to see, in my opinion, is the refinement of what he does. And then, yeah, he can definitely break out when it comes down to it. Josh Giddey has a really good point guard mindset. The skill set that you want from a point guard, he has that. And he's no longer vying for ball handling duties with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Jalen Williams. Now, he's still going to have Kobe's still going to have an opportunity to handle the ball. Ayo's still going to have the ball in his hands. Zach LaVine's still going to get possessions as well. But turning 22, heading into next season, I just think that Josh Giddey, when you look at his per 36 averages, and that's not an indication of what he'd get, right? I'm not saying that. But even last year, in his per 36, 17.7 points per game, 9.2 rebounds, and 7.2 assists. That could be what he averages for the Bulls next season, not because of per 36, but just because of how often he's going to have the ball in his hands. But I want to hear from you guys on this. For Josh Giddey, for you to say that Josh Giddey breaks out next season, what are some of the things that you would want to see? To me, that 18, 9, and 7, I deal with 6.5. If you can get to that with efficiently shooting the ball, still 46% to 48% from the field. If you get to about 34% from three-point range, which he was 33.7%, if you can get to 34.5% from three-point range, taking those same three-pointers per game, I think that is damn near an all-star level season for Josh Giddey. And to me, that would show that he's really refined his game and can contribute to winning for the Chicago Bulls. But let me know what you guys think on that. Other players on this list, just to be thorough, they did have Victor Wembanyama on this list, which is like, come on. Like, are we really listing him as a breakout candidate? Jabari Smith as well with the Houston Rockets, which I guess, going back to Wemby, now that he has a point guard in Chris Paul, he very well could break out a little bit more because it could refine his offensive game. So, never mind. I understand why they have him on this list. Jabari Smith with the Houston Rockets, going to be interesting to see. This is another guy who, you look at their young core, right, of Amen Thompson, Reed Shepherd, Jalen Green, Alfred Şengün. They have a lot of young, solid players on that team. And I like Jabari Smith as well. I like him as a player. And then also they have on this list Trey Murphy III, which he's always going to be a good candidate to list on these type of things, just because of the nature of how he plays, and his role is so defined with that New Orleans Pelicans team. Jonathan Kuminga, it was listed as at number 1 on this list as well. And, Kuminga is a player that I think everybody sees the potential in Kuminga. And the way that he responded last year after kind of being challenged by Steve Kerr, I really like that aspect of things and him as a player. So Josh Giddey listed amongst these players are all really solid for him. He was listed as the 4th option on this list that could break out. And it really comes down to, like I said, the refinement of Josh Giddey's game. He's going to have the role. The role isn't in question, right? He's going to have the role. The refinement of his game, though, and the refinement of how you get those numbers, to me, is the more important thing. And can you be more efficient at that? And let's hope that he can be, man. Like, Josh Giddey has so much raw potential left. And I think that some Bulls fans just don't understand how much potential is left in Josh Giddey, because whether they believe in narratives or they're still upset over not getting picks in the AC trade or whatever, or if they're still Lonzo Ball stands, which there are still a lot of people because of their standship of Lonzo Ball that have not embraced Josh Giddey, and that's all fine. And it's up to Josh Giddey, though, to be on the basketball court and prove what he can bring to the Chicago Bulls squad that just needs talent. And, he's going to be motivated in a contract year, and we'll see what the Bulls can get out of him, man. Like, Josh Giddey has a lot of potential. And not to say that I'm like, it's not that it's a perfect fit, but I do think that players can make things work. And, some of that comes down to kind of hoping the coaches, which is a dangerous thing as well. But, overall, I think that Josh Giddey can really be key to not only helping move Zach LaVine, but unlocking some of the other potential on this team. Modest Bucilis with Josh Giddey in a fast break and with Ayo Dosunmu, like those, like that could be a really fun thing to watch. And I think the Bulls basketball, can't say how many games they're going to win. You guys know, I think they're going to win between like 30 and 35 games, but I think we're going to play a lot more modern and fun brand of basketball as well, at least in my opinion. But with that said, let's move on to the next topic that I want to talk about, right? And this goes back to something that I talk a lot about here because it is kind of my own personal thought process and the way that I view how this front office is going about the young talent aspect, especially when you look at like Patrick Williams and kind of how a lot of Bulls fans are kind of over the Patrick Williams experiment, and I can understand it. But when you look at Lauri Markkanen, right, and how Lauri has really gotten back to basically the player that we saw in those first 2 years here with the Chicago Bulls, right? And when now with Lauri's situation in which, the Utah Jazz could be looking to move on from him, but Shams reported yesterday that Lauri and the Jazz are expected to agree on a long-term contract, right? And that they even may be looking to acquire Brandon Ingram to add to that so they can try to get out of things. Lauri Markkanen is a player that is a cautionary tale on why coaching, for a lot of Bulls fans, I think they don't really understand how important coaching is. When I talk about coaching and its role in development, I always get a handful of people like, well, yeah, the players got to go and work, and they do. You still need to work in the offseason, but coaching is so important to that. When you look at Lauri's career, it was derailed here for the Chicago Bulls by two things. One was injuries that did play a very big part in that role, but also it was derailed by a coach in Jim Boylan who just kind of killed the confidence of a lot of players on that Bulls team at that time. And I think that it's a cautionary tale why you have to have the right coach in the right situation for that right player, for that player to truly kind of get to the heights that they need to get to, right? Lauri Markkanen did. He went away. He went to Cleveland. Didn't really kind of catch on in Cleveland. Then went to Utah, and he was immediately given the ball. Everything was in his hands at that point in time. And he was also coming off an Olympic run, much like Josh Giddey could be, right? As well, where he was coming in with a lot of confidence. And I think that should be something that Bulls fans look out for. As we're going younger and trying to develop players like Modest Bucilis, hopefully players like Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, even still trying to develop, Patrick Williams and get those guys, the scenario in which you develop those players is hugely important. And so I hope that with what the Bulls have started to do here, and when you kind of look at the last couple of moves that they made, like last year, their big acquisition was really creating a player development department headed by Peter Patton, which Ayo and Kobe talked very glowingly about that player development department and how they helped them round out their game to where they got to last year, having career best years, right? And so that is a hugely important part of that, is having those guys. And Kobe talked about it before, is having nobody ever, because he's always been such a good shooter, nobody ever really came to him as a coach and said, hey, if you change this thing a little bit, you can actually get better percentages on your shots, or you can get this shot off a little bit quicker. Peter Patton helped him with that. Ayo Dosunmu talked about how after every game, Peter Patton sent him videos of, hey, this is what you did well, this is what was bad in these possessions. And while you would love your head coach to be that, and for some teams your head coach is that, the fact that the Bulls have gotten that player development department in place and got them in their building is perfect. Then you went out and got Dan Craig and Wes Unseld, both coaches who have been heads of player development departments before in their respective teams that became championship level teams, right? Look at Dan Craig working with Bam, right? Working with Tyler Hero, even working some with Jimmy Butler when Jimmy came to the Miami Heat, right? Working with those players. When you look at a team that we've talked about how they have so many undrafted players that they end up taking and going on a finals run, that's because of, having somebody like a Dan Craig who's there to help guide that, right? Wes Unseld Jr., Michael Porter Jr., Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, right? Guys that, had their own issues and that he helped round that out and help develop those guys. So the Bulls have slowly, over the course of the last year and a half, been prioritizing player development. But now that we've fully gone young, we need to focus on that more. And Lauri Markkanen is something that can be a cautionary tale. But here's what I'll say on the flip side of that. You cannot let your fear of somebody being the next Lauri Markkanen, a player that you trade away, cripple you into giving players bad deals. Now, I'm not saying that Patrick Williams is going to be that. I actually think that the level that Patrick Williams' deal is at, it's basically going to be a mid-level exception within 2 or 3 years. It's not a terrible deal. So I'm not using this to talk about Patrick Williams. I'm just saying going forward that I don't need this front office to be so, their hands to be so tied of being fearful of letting a young guy go and them turning into Lauri, that we end up holding on to players holding on to young guys, keep giving them positions that it's just never going to work out. Now, the Bulls didn't do that when it came to Marko Simonovic. He's gone, right? We know that Marco's gone. He never really worked out for the Bulls. But this new crop of young players, development. But you cannot be so busy looking back at your past mistakes that it cripples you into moving on from people. And I've said this before. Do not be surprised if this upcoming offseason you do, like some of these young guys just don't work out, and maybe the Bulls do trade them at the draft to try to move up or get an additional second rounder or whatever it is in an extremely deep draft. Do not be surprised in that, right? So this could be the year that they look out and say, Dalen. Now, I don't think that Dalen has a clear path to getting minutes as long as Zach LaVine is still on this team. Now, if Zach and Torrey Craig are traded, that changes some things. But I'm just using that as an example to say that, hey, Dalen, like we just haven't seen enough. Like, you haven't seen enough. Let another team develop him. You know, it is what it is. If he still does end up working out, all right, but you gave it a try, right? Or Julian, it's too early to give up on Julian. But, and I'm not saying necessarily that happens this offseason, but do not be surprised if we start seeing some of the guys who are still young, still in their early 20s, moved within the next year to year and a half to where the Bulls just think, hey, this is just not going to work out. Now, I would love to say that everybody's going to develop, that Kobe's going to continue to develop. Io, Josh Giddey, Patrick Williams, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, Modest Bucilis. I hope that all those guys develop into something. And I'm not saying they need to develop into star-level players right away or anything like that. I'm just saying that they develop into players that we look at and say, no, you absolutely have a role, and we are a better basketball team. You help make us a better basketball team with your production on the court. I hope that that's going to happen because that is how you build sustainable success, is developing within and having your guys work out for you. But with the sheer number of guys, there's a huge possibility not all of these guys end up working out for the Bulls. And we can. And even, the same thing that I say, you can't be crippled. At the same time, some Bulls fans' mindset needs to change on, we can't just keep looking at the Lauri situation saying we cannot let a player go because what if they're Lauri? What if they're Derrick Jones Jr.? Right? What if they're those type of guys? What if they're Daniel Gafford? Right? But there still were players that the Bulls did trade away over their years that just did not end up amounting to very much. But that's up to this front office to really start getting together and focusing on. And let's hope that they can do that, right? I'm going to give them some benefit of the doubt. And I hope that the things that they've put into place over the last year and a half of getting the player development department, the new assistant coaches, that it ends up paying off and us finally starting to develop this homegrown talent and see them really help take this team to new heights. But it's that dual-edged sword on looking at that Lauri situation and looking at how he's turned out and how he's rounded out his game. And Lauri's put in work, right? And he's still not perfect. I've said this before, that Lauri Markkanen, even in being, critical of Lauri as well, right now he's kind of like a 7-foot Zach LaVine. And the fact that he gets his numbers, but his team don't win a lot of games with him, being the leading scorer or anything like that. Like, that hasn't happened yet. But, also that Utah Jazz team has been a very weirdly constructed team, and we don't know if they were like trying to tank or whatever else it was. But, Lauri Markkanen at 27 years old still has a lot of career left ahead of him. And as he's set reportedly to sign a long-term big money deal with the Utah Jazz that would almost leave him untradeable for the 2024-25 season, let that be a warning on giving up on players too young, because you don't want to do that. But you also got to develop those young guys. If you're not going to be and put these guys in the right climate to help their development, then what are you doing? Let me know what you guys think on that down below. All right, last topic of the day before we get up out of here today is that it was reported as well by Shams that the Golden State Warriors right now are out on both like Zach LaVine and Brandon Ingram trades. That they are not really considering those trades. They show no appetite, right? And I look at that and I say, no shit. We offered Zach LaVine reportedly, right? Take that with a grain of salt, for Chris Paul. For Chris Paul. And the Warriors looked at that and said, was anybody in doubt that the Warriors have no appetite for Zach LaVine when that didn't happen? Right? It just like, no, they don't want Zach LaVine. And I think at this point, the weekly reporting on what Zach LaVine's trade value or the teams that could be in or out on Zach LaVine, to me, I don't know if I'm going to cover them anymore after this, unless it really sounds like there's a meaty deal there where somebody's really like, oh no, this team is ready, is prepared to go in on Zach LaVine. Here's their offer. I'll mention that. But overall, the Zach LaVine trade saga, at this point, it's over. Zach LaVine is going to be a Chicago Bull to start the season, and he's going to be a Chicago Bull for the foreseeable future. The only thing that changes that is Zach LaVine coming to this team and playing well, or the Chicago Bulls saying, hey, fuck it, we're just going to get what we can get back for Zach, who has the best offer, let's take it. But at the same time, as far as like valuing assets, I love that the Bulls aren't willing to include a first-round pick or even that Portland pick to get off of Zach LaVine, who is a player, again, as I said, has been in the top 20 of scoring, in the top 10 of scoring, if you take away last season, since 2019. That's not a player that you just sell low on. So I'm glad that the Bulls have ultimately decided, hey, Zach is going to be on this team. Let's see what he can bring. Let's see if we can recoup some value from him. If he rehabs his value, great. If not, you got a player that can still go out there and get you 20. Right? And more than that, right? This is just me saying 20. But so, again, at this point, all the damn reporting on it, it is what it is. Zach ain't going to be traded. Zach is going to be a Chicago Bull to start the season. And that just is what it is. Let's get over it. Zach is going to be here. Now, the question is how does Zach fit in? And how do we still prioritize our young players while also putting Zach LaVine in a position to be successful, especially if you want to move him by the trade deadline? That's the biggest question here. And maybe also that the Bulls at some point just pack it in and say, listen, we're not even going to move Zach by the trade deadline. For right now, Zach is a Bull. If we get a call that's an offer we can't turn down, cool. But other than that, Zach LaVine is going to be a Bull. We're going to start planning for him to be a Bull. And that just is what it is. But you guys can let me know what you guys think on everything down below. Make sure you guys are following the channel at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's because of you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.